You can engineer serendipity in a chiropractic office, which can lead to some really unanticipated and surprising outcomes. So let's start by defining the term, what actually is serendipity. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, serendipity is the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. Wikipedia, they say it's a fortunate happenstance or a pleasant surprise coming out of something. It's actually one of my favorite words in the English dictionary, and my fascination with the word actually started happening when I had a near-death experience. So in 1996, I collapsed on a beach in West Africa in Ghana, and I woke up 10 days later in London, and that led me to going into coma. But at one point, I had pneumonia, so only the top left lobe of my lungs was working, and I'd been breathing once a second for quite some time. My resting heart rate was about 150 beats a minute, and quite frankly, I was exhausted. So I just couldn't hold on anymore, even though my parents were flying over. They were in Singapore at the time, and they were on their way to me. I just couldn't, for the life of me, I just couldn't hold on anymore. I was just exhausted, but it was a very peaceful, total surrender going into my imminent death. And then as that happened, I launched into a very classic near-death experience. But one of the things that happened during the near-death experience was that my whole life flashed by me like an over-detailed short film, and no details were spared. The thing that was interesting about the film was like this big cosmic joke was revealed to me, right? In the sense that every good and bad day that I'd ever had, every good and bad moment that I've ever had in my life, it was like the universe or existence or universal intelligence, whatever you like to call it, God, it was like that force was just screaming at me to get me to know who my real essence was. And everything made sense. There was no fate or cosmic unfolding. It was just complete, I don't know, serendipity is the word, that's what really sparked my initial interest in this. But if serendipity is the occurrence of the unplanned events in life, and to engineer something is like the occurrence of the planned, then it begs the question, how do we start to plan something that is essentially unplanned? How can we actually do that? So joining those two words together, engineering and serendipity, is something I'd like to cover today in today's video. Artists have used this technique for developing their careers a lot. Actually, Andy Warhol, who's one of my favorite contemporary artists, he even used to meet at a cafe called Serendipity, and it was in New York, and it was basically a place long before mobile phones and everyone sort of connecting through digital platforms. It was a place where artists come together to share ideas. It was unplanned. It wasn't, mostly that was like they didn't have pre-organized appointments. It was just like, go down to the cafe called Serendipity and let's just see what happens. Let's get people in one room having a coffee or a beer or whatever it is together and see what comes out of that. So who's going to be at Serendipity? Nobody knew beforehand because it was just a lot, they were very different times. So this was really an unplanned thing, but the platform of the cafe was there. The structure and the infrastructure and the meeting place called Serendipity was actually present in New York City. One thing before we get into the dynamics of how I engineer serendipity in our waiting room here in our chiropractic office is that you've got two layers going on in a practice. On the one hand, you've got all this transactional sort of stuff happening, and I call that a layered thing, and it's kind of a bit boring for me, to be honest. But on the other hand, you've got a tetrahedral connection of people and your community within your practice, right? Now, to highlight this, I just want to talk about the elements of carbon graphite badminton rackets and a diamond. Now, they're both made out of carbon. The difference is a badminton racket is structured in layers, and I can smash it on the wooden ground and it will break just because it's put together in layers. On the other hand, a diamond made from exactly the same element, carbon element, that's in a tetrahedral form. So you can bang that on the ground, but it will break the ground. It's just way harder because of the tetrahedral structure. And that's what I like to build within our community, in our chiropractic office, is just this interconnectedness of internal referrals, but with very much a tetrahedral as opposed to a layered transactional structure, only because that structure is way more stronger and the interconnections are way more serendipitous, for want of a better word. So I like to engineer things because I think passively relying on fate or some random thought flash that I might have about a client or some sort of wishful thinking that I come up with, I just find this too passive of an approach to building my chiropractic office. So I really prefer to engineer it. And I'll highlight that with just this question. If you've ever had a client that's popped into your mind that you haven't seen for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and they just kind of pop into your mind at a random event. You can be driving your car, you can be in the shower, you can just be walking the dog or grabbing something from the fridge, and then 3 days later, lo and behold, that client will be in the office. Now, I think most people have had that experience before, and you can kind of put it down to some sort of cosmic link or some sort of fate, or you might be surprised with it, but you don't really do anything else with it. Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking, how can we make the surprise things not so surprising after all? So if you've had that experience before, just know that you're tapping into some sort of energetic field and calling people in. But imagine if you could do this purposefully on a rhythmic basis that's repeated time and time again, and that you can increase your chance at magic or serendipity happening within your chiropractic office in the sense of getting reactivations constantly. So one of the ways we do it is our Hall of Fame. And what is our Hall of Fame? It's a wall that we have our favorite clients on, our most engaged clients that have had at least 15 adjustments. And the reason why we make this wall is these are our favorite people that have raised their hands and said yes to chiropractic. They've either been in for 15 adjustments, or they share values with me, or they've done my community challenge in the form of an intermittent fasting challenge, or they've been to some sort of chiropractic birthday event at the office, or some sort of artist opening, or, they're just people that just show up. They're kind of engaged. They collect my newsletters, they share my music, they refer clients to the office. And these are really like our top 20% of the clients, right? So not all clients are created equally. People that find their way onto this board, they're very approachable for me. They're people that I would be happy to meet. I mean, I don't meet them. I'm not like friends with them outside the practice, but I am extremely friendly with them. And there's a separate film within this film on our Hall of Fame board for you, but just realize that we do seriously collect our favorite clients. We do seriously, our behavior ticks up when these people are in the office because they are our top 20% of clients. They are responsible for 80% of the referrals, 80% of the income, 80% of my meaning that I extrapolate from being a chiropractor. They're just people that I just really like to be around, and they like to be around me, and they like chiropractic. And they do make time, and they can afford chiropractic long term. So there's a nice proverb, it's a Chinese proverb, and that is, birds of a feather flock together. And that means people with the same taste and interests will be found together. So on one hand, we've got demographics, and demographics are things like what part of town you live in, what gender you are, your age bracket, what your income is, what opinions you have, what politics you're into, what values drive your life. On the other hand, though, we've got psychographics. Psychographics, something you might not have heard of, but it's way more interesting to me. And this is when you share opinions with people. This is when the same values guide your decisions in life. It's when you have the same political interests or sporting interests or hobbies, or you think the same. And this is way more interesting when you're trying to engineer serendipity within your practice. One thing I do want to highlight before we get into a great reason to get your community together is that technology, it's just not a replacement for real relationships. So you might have emails going out, you might have WhatsApps going out to clients, but actually the real power is when you're together. And why is this so? Like, the different platforms that we all communicate through are actually quite fragmented. For example, my mum, let's start with mum. So she only communicates with me speaking through the phone. I've got friends that only message me DM through Instagram. I've got other friends that like my Facebook posts or message me through Messenger. Other people prefer to send voice messages. Other people prefer to get on the phone with me. But the point is, it's all quite fragmented, and I develop an archive of memory for what platform people communicate with me through. But when you get people in the same room together, live, it's like all that fragmentation disappears. So one of the really important things I find for developing serendipity or engineering serendipity within your practice is just simply getting your favorite people together in one room and see what happens. So all the fragmentation really disappears when you have people in a live setting. The nice thing about when your favorite clients come together, they often don't know one another, but you are the common link, or chiropractic is the common link. So what's a common conversation? They just start asking each other, why do you come? How long have you been coming? How's your results? They just, if you just eavesdrop on some of the conversations that unfold in those moments, you'll just notice that you provide the platform of getting people together, but you don't micromanage what goes on. You just kind of leave it up to these interconnected tetrahedral kind of diamond structures of people connecting. And often people know one another and know one another via friends or workplaces or whatever it is, but it's a sense of connection, it's a sense of belonging that unfolds. And that's like an offshoot of serendipity, but serendipity can be engineered. If you're missing getting your favorite clients together, you're missing engineering serendipity. If you're missing building a hall of fame because all your favorite clients are stuck together in some statistic metric on your front desk operating server, you're really missing these real human relationships. So I urge you to have at least one community event per year. We have an artist opening at least once a year, a Christmas gathering at least once a year, and that just pops our favorite people together. The same people turn up time and time again. Another way that we also engineer serendipity is just using our newsletter. And we do that, we email that to our inactive client list every quarter. And we always get reactivations from this process. So you might think it's lucky, or you might think, Vismai gets a lot of reactivations within his practice. But actually it's just me using this structured format to engineer the serendipity. Engagement with the vortex elements, that's a real litmus test for us as far as engaging serendipity. So if I see somebody collecting my newsletters, I think, okay, these are the people that are probably going to refer people to me because they take the newsletter home, they engage with it. Some people even collect it. And then, it sits at their home, and if somebody's coming around to them for a cup of tea or something, and they mention something about their body or some sort of issue they're having with their health, then guess what happens? The newsletter comes out, I think Vismai wrote an article on that, let me go and check. And that's a form of structured, engineered serendipity, is by using these vortex tools that compound over time, and people collect an archive of these things over time. So there's 3 tools I'd like you to focus on as far as engineering serendipity goes, and that is your lending library, your quarterly newsletter, and your Hall of Fame building. And there's a diagram here, I'll pop that up on the screen for you, but this is just a diagram that shows connecting the dots to form serendipity. So there's situations that unfold in the waiting room. You see that on the bottom left. So that can be in the form of a comment that a client makes about the newsletter, a book that they want to lend from your library, or they might make a comment on someone that they meet here in the practice. Whatever it is, there's so many comments that get left unacted on in the chiropractic waiting room. I find it a real shame. But anyway, that's a trigger, that's a situation, that's a trigger that unfolds. And if you've got a trained CA in playing with serendipity, they will connect the dots. So the trigger will happen. Let's say somebody's lurking in your lending library. Then your CA needs to be like, I noticed you picked up a book on sleep, for example. Out of interest, is that because you're not sleeping well, or is that because someone you know is not sleeping well? And then that's the trigger, right? That's the dot that gets connected. And then a client might say, actually my husband's not sleeping so well. So then what we do is stretch the moment. So we've got to ask 2 really essential questions. How long has your husband not been sleeping well? And how did it start? So you seek to understand. It's one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits of highly effective people. is first seek to understand, then have the courage to be understood. So what's the courage to be understood? That is, oh look, we've got an article on that. Vismai wrote a newsletter on sleep a while ago. Why don't you take this home to your husband, and then you're back in the office Thursday at 5, get him to read it. If it makes sense, we can make an appointment for him. So then if you do that, and then you have the tenacity when the client's back at Thursday at 5 to follow through on it, that's the tenacity. This is the final part in the engineering of the serendipity. Then potentially a new client's found, or serendipity's found. On the other hand, if a client's just looking in your lending library, no one says anything, no one even offers that you can borrow the book, or no one asks a question when the book comes back from the client. Oh, you know, what was your take-home message from the book? Did you think about anyone from that book? Or did you read it? Was it a good book? Whatever it is, the serendipity's just missed because you don't have any connecting of the dots from the situation, or from the comment, or from the situation in the waiting room that is there. It's just totally ignored and no action's taken on it, which is very common in a chiropractic office. So if you don't have these tools available for your CA, it's really difficult for your CA then to learn how to use the tools, of course, which helps create and engineer the serendipity. As a closing quote for you, I really like this: magic and luck are real, but you are way more in control of it than you actually think. If you start playing around with serendipity, you'll just realize that it's everywhere. It's almost like not available to you. You know, I've just worked here in Singapore Saturday morning, nice busy morning. So much serendipity, so many serendipity triggers. But if we aren't trained in how to turn those triggers in the waiting room into some sort of reactivation, conversation, retention, conversation, or referral, then they all go missed. And no damage is done, but you don't win the serendipity. So, you know, there's CAs that seem to be lucky. They seem to be the ones that always get the referrals at the front desk. They follow through. They say the right thing at the right time. That's one way of doing it. That's the rapport, and a great CA will always be great with rapport, and they'll just really enjoy the communication. But then if you put these tools in the hands of a CA that naturally has great rapport with a client and naturally gets, you know, is a kind of like a trustworthy person, then they'll have a lot of fun gamifying, helping you build your practice by using these tools. So you are in control of engineering serendipity way more than just relying on a random thought that happens in the shower one time when you think of a client, you know? So that's today's film on serendipity. Please explore it, provide the tools to your CA, build them, and then train on them. Please like and subscribe this film if you find it interesting so you get the notifications. And there's some links to some resources on vismai.com down below if you're interested in building any of these tools. Okay, thank you for listening.